The thing about dying in a blizzard is that your body gives up before your mind does. Evelyn knew this because she'd stopped shivering an hour ago, which meant hypothermia had moved past uncomfortable into fatal. Her feet were blocks of ice she could no longer feel. The gash on her temple had stopped bleeding. And somewhere behind her, Rhodes's men were still searching, their voices swallowed by the howling wind. She could have stayed, but staying meant marrying Councilman Rhodes, meant letting him put his cruel hands on her the way he did that morning, blocking her exit while he explained all the ways a widow with debts had no choice in the matter. So she'd run. Into the forest, into the storm, into what was rapidly becoming her own grave. Now she felt a sinking certainty that she was lost because surely that dark shape ahead was the same boulder she'd passed before, except it moved. Evelyn's heart seized. She stumbled backward, her numb legs betraying her, and went down hard on her tailbone. Pain lanced up her spine, but she barely felt it because the shape was rising, unfolding into something massive and furred and impossible. A wolf. No, too big to be a wolf. Too deliberate in the way it turned its head toward her, amber eyes glowing like coals in the darkness. This is it, she thought. At least it'll be faster than freezing. The shape took a step closer, then another. She could see its breath now, misting in the air between them, could see intelligence in those eyes, something that made her skin prickle with a recognition she didn't understand. Then it shifted. One moment. Wolf. The next. A man, naked and unconcerned by the sub-zero temperature, his body carved from muscle and shadow and barely leashed violence. Dark hair whipped around a face that was too beautiful and too harsh all at once, like a cliff face at sunset, stunning and fatal. He looked at her the way a starving man looks at a feast. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a low rasp that somehow carried over the wind. Evelyn laughed, a broken sound. "Yeah, well, neither should you, unless hypothermia is your thing." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Anger? She couldn't tell and was too cold to care. He closed the distance between them, and now he was crouching before her, heat rolling off his skin like he'd swallowed the sun. Up close, she could see the silver threading through the amber of his eyes. "You're bleeding," he said, and reached for her face. She jerked back. "Don't. You'll die out here." A fact, delivered with the same certainty as the wind. Evelyn's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. "I'm getting real tired of people telling me what's going to happen to me." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Then let me rephrase." He stood, towering over her, and suddenly the cold wasn't the most dangerous thing in these woods. "You're mine now." There was something in the way he said it, like he'd been waiting for her. "Who are you?" she whispered. He smiled then, all teeth and promise. "The man who's going to carry you home." Before she could protest, he was scooping her up as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against that impossible heat. She had so many questions, but her body had other priorities. It voted for not dying by burrowing into his warmth like he was salvation itself. "I don't even know your name," she managed, her words slurring as exhaustion crashed over her. "Noah." His arms tightened. "And you're Evelyn." She wanted to ask how he knew that, but the darkness was pulling at her with gentle insistence. The last thing she registered was the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe. It will make my day. Evelyn woke to warmth and the crackle of fire. For one disoriented moment, she thought she was home, that Owen was stoking the hearth for morning, that the past 6 months of grief and debt and Rhodes's predatory attention had been nothing but a nightmare. Then memory crashed back, and with it, the awareness that she was in a bed that wasn't hers, in a room she didn't recognize, wearing a shirt that definitely wasn't hers. She sat up too fast. Pain spiked through her temple, and she pressed a hand to her head, finding clean bandages where the gash had been. Easy. Noah's voice came from across the room, and she turned to find him sitting in a chair by the fire, fully clothed now in dark wool and leather. He looked both more and less dangerous than he had in the forest, less because he wasn't naked and radiating otherworldly power, more because the firelight caught the predatory grace in the way he moved. "Where am I?" Her voice came out rougher than she'd intended. "My home." He crossed to a small table and poured water from a pitcher into a cup. "About 15 miles north of where I found you." 15 miles. She stared at him. "You carried me 15 miles in a blizzard?" "Don't worry, the storm broke after the first 5. He offered her the water, and she took it gratefully, her throat feeling like sandpaper. "Drink. You're dehydrated." She drank, watching him over the rim of the cup. In the firelight, she could see details she'd missed in the forest, the scars that traced his forearms, the way he held himself with the kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence in one's ability to handle violence. "You knew my name," she said when she'd drained the cup. "How?" Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "I've been looking for you." "That's not a real answer." "No," he agreed, "but it's the truth." Evelyn set the cup aside and pulled the blanket more firmly around herself, trying to ignore the fact that she was wearing only his shirt and her undergarments. "So you just wander around in blizzards looking for random women?" "Not random. You." He moved closer, and she caught that scent again. Pine, smoke, and something that made her wolf stir for the first time since Owen's death. "Why?" The word came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with 6 months of grief and fear and bone-deep exhaustion. "You don't know me. I don't know you. And in case you missed it, I'm not exactly a catch right now. I'm a widow with more debt than prospects, running from a man who thinks he owns me, and I just tried to walk through a blizzard rather than face my problems like an adult." Noah was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes studying her with an intensity she'd never experienced before. "You're my mate," he said finally, as if those 3 words explained everything. Evelyn couldn't help but laugh. "Your mate?" "Yes." "That's not possible. I'm already—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Already mated." Except she wasn't, was she? Owen had been her husband, but they'd never completed the mate bond. He'd been human, and she'd been too young and too desperate for safety to care about ancient rituals. "You were married," Noah said, reading her thoughts with uncomfortable accuracy. "But not bonded. There's a difference." "How do you—" She shook her head. "You know what? It doesn't matter. Even if this mate thing is real, I'm not interested in trading one cage for another. Rhodes wants to own me because of debt. You want to own me because of some mystical bond. It's the same thing." "No." His single word carried enough weight to stop her building tirade. "It's not." He moved to the window, putting distance between them, and Evelyn felt the sudden loss of his proximity. "I've been alive for 237 years, he said, his voice quiet. "Waiting. The bond doesn't activate until both people exist and are ready for each other. I felt it spark 3 weeks ago. This sudden awareness that you were finally here, finally ready, that everything I'd been waiting for was real." He turned back to face her. "I've spent these weeks searching, following the pull of the bond through 6 territories until it led me to that forest, to you. You want to know what I thought when I saw you?" Evelyn couldn't look away from the raw honesty in his eyes. I thought, she's worth every year I waited, every lonely decade, every moment I wondered if the bond was a myth and I was a fool for believing in it. His hands clenched at his sides. So no, Evelyn. I don't want to own you. I want to be worthy of you. The silence that followed his words felt heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. I buried my husband 6 months ago, she whispered finally. I spent 8 years married to a good man who deserved better than a wife, who could never quite love him the way he loved her. And now you're standing here telling me we're mates, that you've been waiting centuries, and Her voice cracked. I don't know if I have anything left to give. Noah crossed back to her, moving slowly, like she was a wild thing he didn't want to spook. He knelt beside the bed, bringing them eye to eye. Then, don't give me anything. Just let me keep you safe while you heal. Let me feed you and warm you and make sure Rhodes never puts his hands on you again. The rest? He lifted one shoulder in a shrug that was trying for casual and failing. The rest we figure out together, or not at all. Your choice. My choice, she repeated, testing the words. When was the last time anyone had given her a choice? Always. His hand moved, hovering near her face but not touching. Say the word, and I'll take you anywhere you want to go. Find you a place where Rhodes can't reach you, where you can start over. I won't force the bond. And if I stay put? Something blazed in his eyes, hope and hunger and desperate restraint. Then you stay as my guest. Sleep in this room, eat at my table, take whatever time you need. The bond will be there if you're ready. Evelyn looked at the way he held himself carefully in check, despite the tension vibrating through his frame, at the vulnerability in his eyes that said he'd already lost this gamble in his heart, that walking away from her would cost him everything, but he'd do it anyway if she asked. She thought about Rhodes, about the village that had turned its back on her after Owen died, about the cottage that had never quite felt like home, the marriage that had been comfortable but never passionate, the life she'd been living that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. I'll stay, she heard herself say. For now, she added. The smile that broke across his face was blinding. The fortress defied her expectations entirely. Every room seemed designed for comfort rather than display, with thick rugs and deep chairs and windows that framed the mountains like paintings. No gleaming marble, no servants scurrying through corridors, just space and warmth, and a kind of deliberate solitude. No servants? She asked on the second day, watching Noah prepare breakfast with the ease of long practice. I prefer solitude. He slid a plate of eggs and bread in front of her. Having people around constantly felt like suffocating. 200 years of solitude sounds lonely. It was. He sat across from her, his own plate largely ignored as he watched her eat with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. But I had time to learn things, cooking, building, how to be someone worth finding when you finally arrived. Evelyn paused, fork halfway to her mouth. You were preparing for me, specifically? I was preparing for the possibility that the bond was real, that somewhere, someone was growing into the person they needed to be to match who I was becoming. He smiled, self-deprecating. Turns out I was right. I'm kind of a disaster right now, she said quietly. You survived 8 years with a man you didn't love without letting it make you cruel. You chose freezing to death over submitting to someone who wanted to break you. You're still fighting even though you have every reason to give up. Noah's eyes held hers. That's strength, Evelyn. She wanted to list all the ways she'd failed, at loving Owen properly, at managing the debts, at being someone worth staying for. But the way Noah looked at her, like she was something rare and precious, made the words stick in her throat. Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Noah would wake early and train. She'd watched from her window as he shifted between human and wolf forms with fluid grace, running the perimeter of the fortress like he was checking for threats. She'd started helping with meals, needing to feel useful, to prove she wasn't just another burden. They talked about surface things at first. Her childhood before her parents died, his centuries of wandering, the way the world had changed around him. But beneath the conversation, there was always the pull. The bond that Noah had talked about, making itself known in small ways. The way her wolf would surface when he entered a room, attentive in a way it had never been. The way her skin felt hypersensitive when he passed close enough to brush her arm. The way she'd started dreaming about amber eyes and the taste of pine. On the 5th night, restless and unable to sleep, she found him in the main room, staring into the fire. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Too many thoughts." She moved to sit in the chair across from him, pulling her borrowed robe tighter. "Tell me what you know about Owen." That got his attention. He turned to face her fully, surprised. "What do you want to know?" "When I was married, did you know I existed but couldn't feel the bond?" Noah was quiet for a moment. "No, the bond doesn't activate until both people are ready. When you married him, you were, 19? 19 and running from a bad situation," she confirmed. "He was safe." "Then you weren't ready," Noah said simply. "You needed that safety, that time to heal and grow. The bond couldn't form because you weren't who you needed to be yet." "And now I am?" "Now you're someone who survived grief without letting it destroy you." He leaned closer towards her. "You're ready, even if you don't feel like it." Evelyn stared into the fire, feeling the weight of his words. "I feel guilty," she admitted, "for not loving Owen the way he deserved, for feeling this." She gestured between them. "When I should be mourning." "Grief and desire aren't mutually exclusive," Noah said quietly. "You can mourn him and still want something more." "He was good to you?" "He was kind, patient. He knew I didn't love him the way he loved me, and he never resented me for it." Her throat tightened. "He deserved better." "Maybe." Noah's voice was gentle. "Or maybe he got exactly what he needed. Someone who cared enough to be honest, even when honesty was hard. You didn't pretend. You didn't lead him on." She looked up at him, tears burning her eyes. "How are you so understanding about this? I'm sitting here talking about my dead husband while I sit here, knowing that every year you spent with him was a year I spent waiting?" Noah smiled, but there was an edge of pain to it. "I won't lie. There were moments these past weeks when I wished the bond had sparked sooner, that I could have found you before you married him. But that's not how it works. You needed that time. Needed to learn what you didn't want so you could recognize what you do want when it appears." "And what do I want?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Noah stood, moving around the fire to crouch in front of her chair the way he had that first day. "I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you what I want, if you'll let me." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "Tell me." "I want to wake up and know you're safe. I want to hear your voice, your laugh, every argument you're willing to give me." His hand lifted, hovering near her face. "I want to touch you, to taste you, to memorize every sound you make when you're happy or angry, or so lost in pleasure you can't remember your own name." Heat flooded through her, pooling low in her belly. "But more than any of that," Noah continued, his voice dropping lower, "I want you to choose me, not because you're running from roads, but because you want this. Want us, and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes for you to be sure." "What if I'm already sure?" The words left her mouth before she could second-guess them. Something blazed in Noah's eyes, that same desperate hunger she'd seen in the forest, barely leashed. "Then I'm going to need you to be very clear about what you're saying, because I've been holding myself back for 5 days and my control is not as good as I'd like it to be." Evelyn reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the line of his jaw. His skin was warm, roughened by stubble, and at her touch he went absolutely still. "I'm saying I'm tired of being afraid. Owen was safe. Rhodes thought he could own me because safe meant weak." Her hand slid into his hair, and she felt the shudder that ran through him. "But you make me feel dangerous." "Evelyn." Her name came out rough, choked. "I'm saying touch me," she whispered. "Please." The word please shattered whatever restraint he'd been clinging to. Noah surged forward, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that should have frightened her, but instead felt like coming home. Like every kiss she'd ever had before this had been a poor translation, and this was the original language. His hands cupped her face with devastating gentleness, despite the barely controlled need radiating from him. She opened for him, tasting him, her fingers tightening in his hair as he deepened the kiss. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Not here," he said, his voice wrecked. "You deserve better than a chair by the fire." He stood, lifting her with him as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to his room. Their room, some part of her brain whispered. The bed was massive, piled with furs and blankets, and he laid her down with a care that made her chest ache. "Tell me if you want to stop," he said, settling beside her, his hand tracing the line of her throat. "Any time, any reason. We have forever, Evelyn. There's no rush." But there was a rush. 6 months of grief and loneliness and feeling like she was barely surviving, and now this man who looked at her like she was everything, who'd waited centuries and still said, "Any time, any reason." She pulled him down to her, kissing him with all the pent-up need she'd been pretending not to feel. His response was immediate, his body covering hers, his hands mapping territory with reverent exploration. When his fingers found the hem of her nightdress, she lifted her arms, letting him pull it over her head. He stared at her like a man seeing the sun for the first time. "Beautiful," he breathed, his hand tracing her curves. "I've imagined this, but you're so much more than I." She silenced him with another kiss, her hands working at his shirt, needing to feel his skin against hers. He helped her, shrugging out of the fabric, and then it was her turn to stare. He was carved from muscle and scars, beautiful and brutal, and when she traced the longest scar, a jagged thing that ran from his shoulder to his ribs, he caught her hand. "Old war," he said. "Old life." "Tell me," she whispered, and so he did, his voice low and intimate, painting pictures of centuries past while his hands learned the geography of her body. They traded stories and touches, kisses and confessions, until the past felt like something they could finally set down, until the only thing that mattered was his hand sliding higher, her breath catching, the way he watched her face with absolute focus as he, "Noah," she gasped, her back arching. "I've got you," he murmured against her throat, his clever fingers working magic that made her forget her own name. "Let go, Evelyn. I've got you." And she did, shattering in his arms with a cry that he swallowed with a kiss. When she could breathe again, she reached for him, wanting to give him the same pleasure he'd given her, but he caught her hands, pinning them gently above her head. "Not tonight," he said, though she could feel the evidence of his need pressed against her hip. "Tonight was for you." "That doesn't sound fair." "Life rarely is." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. But I've waited 2 centuries. I can wait a little longer to make sure you're ready for all of this. She wanted to push back, but exhaustion was pulling at her, the kind that came after intense emotion and release. Noah seemed to sense it, rolling to his side and pulling her against his chest, his arms banding around her like safety itself. "Sleep," he murmured into her hair. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." But as she drifted off, wrapped in warmth and the steady beat of his heart, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow was going to bring complications neither of them were ready for. She was right. The pounding on the fortress door came at dawn, jolting them both awake. Noah was out of bed and dressed before Evelyn had fully opened her eyes, his entire demeanor shifting from relaxed to predatory in the space of a heartbeat. "Stay here," he said, already moving toward the door. She grabbed clothes, one of his shirts and her mostly clean dress, and followed him into the main room. Through the window, she could see riders, at least a dozen, and at their head was a face she recognized with sinking dread. Rhodes. "How did he find me?" she whispered. "The villagers probably told him which direction you ran." Noah's voice was flat, emotionless, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Stay behind me." He opened the door before she could argue, and Rhodes's smug face greeted them, his expression shifting from satisfied to uncertain as he took in Noah's size. "I'm here for my fiancé," Rhodes announced, his voice carrying the false authority of someone used to being obeyed. "The woman who ran from her obligations." "I'm not your fiancé," Evelyn snapped, stepping around Noah despite his warning growl. "I never agreed to marry you. You forged a contract." Rhodes's smile was patronizing. "You're a widow with substantial debts, my dear. I'm willing to overlook your indiscretion here if you come home now and fulfill your obligations." "She has no obligations to you," Noah said, his voice carrying enough threat to make several of Rhodes's men shift nervously. "Leave. Now." "And who are you to make demands?" Rhodes's bravado was slipping as he took in the fortress, the remoteness of their location, the casual way Noah dominated the space. "Some mountain hermit who took advantage of a desperate woman?" "I'm the Alpha King," Noah said quietly. "And you're trespassing." The color drained from Rhodes's face. Behind him, his men were already backing toward their horses, recognizing the danger even if their leader was too stubborn to see it. You can't be," Rhodes stammered. "I can be, and I am." Noah took a step forward, and Rhodes instinctively stumbled backward. "You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't tear out your throat for threatening my mate." "Mate?" Rhodes's eyes darted to Evelyn. "She's human. She can't—" "I'm not human," Evelyn interrupted. "I'm a wolf who hasn't shifted in years because my husband was human and I was trying to fit into his world. But I remember how." She felt her wolf rising, responding to Noah's proximity and Rhodes's threat. "Want to see?" Rhodes looked between them, calculation warring with fear in his eyes. "The debts are still real. She owes nothing." Noah's voice dropped to something barely human. "Owen's debts were paid 3 months ago. I have the receipts from the magistrate. Would you like me to retrieve them, or would you prefer to explain why you've been telling her otherwise?" Evelyn's head snapped toward Noah. "You paid his debts?" "When I first felt the bond activate, I started looking into your situation, found the debts, and cleared them." He kept his eyes on Rhodes. "But while investigating your finances, I discovered something interesting. Discrepancies in the regional tax records. Someone had been embezzling from the crown for years, using their position to siphon funds and prey on vulnerable women." His smile turned sharp. Care to guess who? Rhodes's face went from white to gray. That's a lie? It's documented. Noah smiled. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate before I came looking for my mate? He gestured, and suddenly the woods around them weren't empty anymore. Wolves melted out of the trees, massive and silent, surrounding Rhodes's men. Evelyn recognized the tactical formation, predators closing in on trapped prey. So here's what's going to happen, Noah continued, his voice conversational, despite the threat radiating from every line of his body. You're going to return to the capital, you're going to confess your crimes to the High Council, and you're going to pray they're more merciful than I'm feeling right now. And if I refuse? Rhodes tried for defiance, but his voice shook. Then my wolves will escort you to the capital in pieces. Noah's smile widened. Your choice. Rhodes looked at Evelyn one last time, and she saw the moment he realized he'd lost. Whatever power he'd thought he had over her was gone, burned away by Noah's revelation. This isn't over, Rhodes said, but it was the empty threat of a man with no cards left to play. Yes, actually it is, Noah said flatly. They watched in silence as Rhodes and his men rode away, escorted by wolves who would make sure they reached the capital. When they were gone, Evelyn turned to Noah. You paid his debts, she said again, still trying to process. 3 weeks ago. I needed you free, he said simply. Free to choose, free to leave if you wanted. The debts were leverage, so I removed them. Why didn't you tell me? He turned to face her. Would you have trusted that I wasn't just another man trying to control you? She opened her mouth to counter, but he was right. If he'd told her that first day, she would have assumed the worst, would have seen it as manipulation rather than liberation. Owen knew, she said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. He worked for the regional treasury. He would have seen the discrepancies in Rhodes's accounts. That's why he was so stressed those last few weeks, why he kept staying up late. He told me he was reviewing something important, that he needed to be absolutely certain before he acted. Her breath caught. That's why Rhodes likely arranged the logging accident, Noah finished grimly. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I didn't want to tell you until I had solid proof. But yes, Owen likely discovered the fraud and was planning to expose it. The grief that hit her was different this time, not for the loss of a husband she'd never quite loved enough, but for a good man who'd died trying to do the right thing, who'd protected her even in death by documenting everything carefully enough that Noah had been able to uncover the truth. I need to go back, she said, to the cottage. Owen left papers, I remember now, a box he told me to keep safe. He said if anything happened to him, to make sure it got to the magistrate. Then we'll go, Noah said, together. The cottage looked smaller than she remembered, worn and tired in the weak winter sunlight. Evelyn stood in the doorway, steeling herself, then pushed inside. Everything was as she'd left it, the cold hearth, the empty cupboards, the table where Rhodes had trapped her. But now, seeing it with clear eyes, she could also see evidence of Owen's care. The sturdy shelves he'd built, the chair he'd mended, the small things that said, I love you, in the only language he'd known how to speak. The box is in the bedroom, she said, her voice thick, hidden under the floorboards. Noah followed her silently, his presence a comfort as she knelt and pried up the loose board Owen had shown her. The box was still there, wrapped in oilcloth, and when she opened it, her breath caught. Papers, yes, account books and ledgers documenting years of Rhodes's theft, but also a letter, sealed with Owen's careful script. For Evelyn, if I'm not here to tell you myself. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. My dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving you alone. I'm sorry for the debts that will fall on your shoulders, but I'm not sorry for the years we had. You gave me kindness when you could have given nothing. You stayed when you could have left. You tried, even when your heart was somewhere else, and that meant more than you know. I've documented everything about Rhodes's embezzlement. Take these papers to the magistrate. He's honest, one of the few. He'll make sure justice is served. And Evelyn, when you find whatever it is you've been looking for, and you will find it, I know you will, don't feel guilty. Don't let my ghost hold you back from living. I had 8 years with you, and they were good years, even if they weren't the passionate love story either of us might have wanted. Her tears came then, hot and unexpected. Not for lost love, but for grace. For a good man who'd known her heart better than she'd known it herself, who'd freed her with his final words. Noah's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. He loved you well. He did, Evelyn whispered, better than I deserved. No. Noah pulled her against his chest, letting her cry. Exactly as you deserved, and he knew you'd find your way here eventually. She looked up at him. This man who'd waited centuries, who'd torn through a blizzard to reach her, who'd paid debts and faced down roads and given her every choice. How did you know, she asked, that I was ready, that the bond would work? I didn't, he admitted. I just knew you existed, and that was enough. The rest? He smiled. The rest was hoping you'd feel even a fraction of what I felt when I saw you. I felt it, she said. In the forest, when you shifted and looked at me like I was everything, he finished, because you are. She kissed him then, there in the cottage that had been her prison and her grief, kissing him until the ghosts of the past felt laid to rest. When they finally broke apart, she took Owen's letter and the box of evidence and walked out without looking back. The confrontation with the High Council took 3 days. Noah had presented the evidence with cold precision, and Evelyn had stood beside him, no longer a widow running from debts, but a Luna Queen, bringing justice. Rhodes had tried to deny everything, but the numbers didn't lie. Neither did the other women who'd come forward once they'd heard Evelyn's story. Widows and orphans, Rhodes had preyed on for years. In the end, Rhodes, who was led away in chains, his assets seized, his name stripped from the council rolls, and Evelyn, standing in the council chambers with Noah at her side, finally felt the weight lift. Is it always like this? She asked that night, back in the fortress that had become home. Being queen? Sometimes worse, Noah admitted. They were in bed, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Politics? Territorial disputes? Wolves who think they can challenge me because I've been alone so long. You're not alone anymore. No. His arms tightened around her. I'm not. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind outside. Then Evelyn said, I want to shift. Noah went still. When? Tomorrow. I haven't shifted since before Owen. I was trying so hard to fit into his human world that I forgot what it felt like to run. She lifted her head to look at him. Will you run with me? The smile that broke across his face was radiant. I've been waiting for you to ask. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day that made everything sharp and bright. They stood on the fortress balcony, the mountains spread before them like a promise. It might not come easy, Evelyn warned. It's been years. Then we'll take it slow. Noah stripped off his shirt, his eyes never leaving hers. Together. She nodded, pulling off her own clothes, feeling the winter air bite at her skin. Then she reached for the wolf that had been sleeping inside her, dormant and waiting. It rose with a joy that stole her breath, her wolf recognizing Noah's, recognizing home. The shift was smoother than she'd expected, her body remembering the change, and then she was standing on 4 legs instead of 2, seeing the world through wolf eyes. Noah shifted beside her, massive and dark, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then he yipped, a sound almost playful, and took off running. She chased him, her wolf singing with the freedom of it. They ran through the snow, along the ridge, down into the valley where the trees stood sentinel. He let her catch him sometimes, tumbling with her in the powder, then darting away before she could pin him. It was play and courtship and joy all tangled together, and when they finally stopped, breathless and happy, the sun was setting in shades of gold and pink. They shifted back, human again, but still tangled together in the snow. "I love you," Evelyn said, the words finally easy. "I don't know when it happened, maybe in the forest, maybe that first night, maybe just now, but I love you." Noah kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. "I've loved you since before I knew you. I'll love you long after this world ends. You're mine, Evelyn, and I'm yours." They lay there in the snow as the stars came out, 2 wolves who'd found each other across centuries and storms and grief, who'd chosen each other when choice was the hardest thing. And if the future held challenges, and it would, because nothing was ever simple, they'd face them together. Because Evelyn had learned something in that blizzard, in that desperate flight toward death. Sometimes the scariest choice is the one that saves you. Sometimes you have to run toward danger to find safety. And sometimes the man who says, "You're mine now," is really saying, "I've been waiting for you to find your way home." And she had. Finally, impossibly completely, she had. Would you have run into that blizzard or faced roads? And where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.